Okay, welcome back. Let's talk a little bit about externalities, public bads, and the origins of government. Now, in my last lecture, I said that the demand of government, or demand for government, was a demand for goods and services not easily produced by the market because of their public goods-like characteristics. But this isn't the whole story. In addition to public goods, which are goods that people want, that are non-rival and non-excludable, there are such things as public bads. Public bads are activities, behaviors, or products that people don't want that have those very same characteristics as public goods. They are non-rival and non-excludable. Let me give you some examples. Pollution is a clear public bad. If the air in our city is polluted, my being inconvenienced then doesn't diminish your inconvenience. That is to say, our non-enjoyment of the good is non-rival. Also, when you are outside, it's not possible to exclude some people from the harm from pollution. You cannot avoid pollution unless you move to a cleaner city. It's not yet possible to purchase a pocket of clean air that follows you around on the street, thus exempting you from the public bad. Here are some other examples: contagious diseases, traffic, noise pollution, financial panics, terrorism, and just about any harmful legislation are also pretty clear-cut cases of public bads. There might also be some more controversial cases that have some good aspects and some bad aspects. But in all of these cases, people suffer harms from which they cannot or find it very difficult or costly to shield themselves from, particularly by acting alone. That's the non-excludability factor. I cannot exclude myself from the harm, or other people cannot exclude me from the harm. If one of us is harmed, everybody is harmed. And one person's suffering does nothing to alleviate the suffering of others. There's an unlimited amount of suffering to go around. There's no rivalry, in other words. So, to follow up on some of these examples, if you catch a virus, that doesn't make me any less likely to catch the virus. There isn't a finite amount of virus to go around. Viruses replicate, it spreads. In fact, if you catch a virus, it probably makes me more likely, not less likely to catch it. If a terror attack is very likely, or if a crime wave makes the neighborhood unsafe, we all experience that lack of safety. And your experience of fear doesn't diminish my experience of fear in that sense. We are all in the same boat together, so that's the non-rivalry cause. And my experience of fear doesn't diminish your experience of fear, and so that is the non-excludability clause. If a law makes it easy for government to snoop on everyone's computer, that's a cost we all have to live with. And I'm not saying there aren't benefits, perhaps, to such laws, but there are certainly costs as well. And in the case of massive data dragnets, at least, the cost of collecting one additional user's data communications is going to be negligible. And so you have this non-rivalry and this non-excludability thing going on once again. We can apply the same logic to financial panic. Sometimes these are called financial contagions, right, to use the contagious disease metaphor. And it really is like a contagious disease. Everybody's access to credit markets if they own a business, and every worker's ability to find a job, because those businesses can't hire and need are laying people off, is harmed. And if one person's ability is harmed, another is not. This was a main reason for the bank bailouts we saw in 2008. The notion was that the bailout was, in effect, restoring a public good and helping people avoid a public bad, something that we were all suffering from. Now, I think it's possible to argue, and I think with some justice as well, that even in a financial panic, even in a terror attack, even in the case of bad laws, and even in the case of public epidemics or public health epidemics, some people win and some people lose. It's just usually that lots of more people lose than some people win. If you are, I don't know, if you are a private security service or a homeland security expert, maybe the threat of terrorism is a good thing for your job. And maybe if you're a computer expert, the fact that the government can snoop on people is an opportunity to make money. And certainly, if you are someone who buys repossessed houses and fixes them up, a crash in the housing market might, in fact, be just the opportunity you're looking for. And so To say that it's a public bad doesn't mean that we all lose or that we all lose equally. It just means that if one person loses, if one person exhibits a cost, everybody exhibits at least some cost. Now, a naive observer and people who are generally untutored in political science often have a very simplistic attitude towards public bads, right? The notion is that it's just bad people that cause public bads, right? People who pollute, people who speculate in the markets, greedy politicians, and always greedy investment bankers. All these people behave badly, and those people impose public bads on the world. So bad people cause bad things to happen in the world. I think if that were true, that would actually be pretty comforting. Because if you think about it, only a very small fraction of people in society are truly evil. Society really couldn't function if everyone were actively trying to harm each other. That would make civilization just about impossible. Public bads usually happen for one of two reasons. A, they happen as a byproduct of a mutually beneficial transaction. For example, car manufacturers sell consumers cars, but innocent bystanders have to deal with polluted air and global warming on top of that. These you might call externalities. So you have a transaction that is mutually beneficial to person X and person Y, but there's a person Z who's an innocent bystander who suffers costs. A second way that public bads can occur is because no single person wants to pay to fix a problem that affects everyone. No one wants to be the sucker in the story. No one wants to take on the tremendous costs of curing malaria or draining a swamp that will help cure malaria or spraying pesticides that will kill the mosquitoes that will eventually get rid of the malaria and so on and so forth, right? Everybody will benefit by doing so, but nobody wants to be the one person to do it. And because nobody wants to be the sucker in the story, you often have something called a collective action problem, which is that nobody acts because of an inability to act collectively and deal with the problem of fairly attributing the costs of acting to everyone. So if you look at the Mansur-Olson article that I assigned for the class, you'll see a little bit of that in action. So public bads are therefore pretty normal human problems. They're not usually the product of any individual's extraordinary malfeasance. It's not anybody is behaving extraordinarily badly. It's people behaving ordinarily, but in the ordinary course of things, small little bad things accumulate to one giant bad thing. And so, like public goods, public bads provide a rationale for government activity. And especially taxation and regulation. So when people ask you why is it necessary that we pay taxes or why is it necessary to have the government regulate things, perhaps this constitutes the element of an answer. Now, two things require attention here. One, the regulation of external effects on innocent bystanders, and second, the cleanup when the regulation fails to fully solve the problem. And so both of these are going to require public resources. Public resources will be required to monitor the private sector to make sure that no external effects are going on, as well as to create a court system where people will be punished if they do in fact violate the regulations and rules. And money is also going to be needed to provide the cleanup when a waterway becomes polluted or when an area becomes infested with disease. Some way of collecting the funds is going to be necessary to clean up the problem. Let's talk a little bit about the founding of the United States and public bads. After the American Revolution, the states set up, actually during the American Revolution technically, the states set up the Articles of Confederation as a framework to govern themselves. But as your textbook and as most sources will say, this framework was deficient in a number of ways, and in particular it created a number of public bads. Or we could equivalently say that it failed to create the means to provide some desired public goods, particularly effective security, free trade, and a stable currency. I think it would be accurate to say that the Constitution of 1787, which is the one we still live under, was part of a response to the presence of collective action problems within the states. This problem where nobody wanted to be the one to bear all of the costs for acting collectively, but there wasn't much of a mechanism to force everybody else to act on the same page. So collectively, the states would have been better off acting together, but states individually took actions on their own which benefited them but tended to harm other states. In this case, the other states were the bystanders. For example, they had control of their own trade policy, so they levied tariffs on each other in a sort of beggar thy neighbor policy, when they would have been better off as a whole, and their citizens would be better off as a whole had they had a policy of free trade. They printed money to inflate away public debts, so it was difficult for the Continental Congress to maintain control over the currency, because each state was printing money on their own, causing problems for other states where their currency became devalued or debased as a result. And they were slow to come to each other's defense, even though they were legally, through the Articles of Confederation, bound to come to each other's defense. There was no mechanism to make them do so, and so this produced a few hairy moments in the early times of the American Republic, where internal rebellions in particular threatened to topple individual state governments. Now, historians often say that the lack of power to tax directly and the lack of any real means to pressure the states to live up to their financial obligations in the years between the end of the Revolutionary War in 1783 and 1787, when the Constitution was ratified, the current Constitution was ratified, that this led American founders to seek a stronger national government. And I think in the broad terms that's true. But it wasn't specifically the need to have a stronger government, right? We tend to see things in terms of big government and small government. But it was demand to create particular kind of strength, a strength in particular areas, if you will. Particular kinds of public goods, like free trade between the states, which is enshrined in Article 1, Section 8, and avoid public bads, like currency competitions between the states, which created the power, which gave the, which in the Constitution reflected the power to mint and coin. So the Constitution created new federal powers, but for a specific purpose, or for specific purposes, plural. The framers of the Constitution actually went to great pains to highlight the fact that they were creating power, but they were creating a limited power, right? So they wanted to increase the power of the national government, but not give it a blank check to do whatever it wanted, but give it the power to solve very particular problems that they had in mind. And if you weren't certain enough of this, they reminded everyone of this right at the end of Bill of Rights. The last thing that they said, basically, in the original Constitution, which is the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, which reads, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people." Right? This makes it very clear that they're not creating a blank check to the federal government, but are enumerating certain powers for certain purposes and otherwise reserving those powers to the states and to the people. All right, so in conclusion, in addition to securing public goods, governments are often put in place to help avoid specific public bads. Public bads are either the result of externalities or collective action problems. The U.S. Constitution is quite a good example of creating governmental powers for a purpose, and those purposes involved, among other things, creating public goods and trying to mitigate public bads. Moving forward a little bit, as you know, the original design of the federal government was intended to be quite limited, leaving to the states a very wide field of action in public policy. Most public policy, I think, under the original framework of the Constitution, was supposed to be carried out by the states. But technology and changing circumstances have either created new public bads. Some examples might include acid rain, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, global warming, or these changing circumstances and changing technologies might have improved the government's ability to fight existing public bads. So public bads that they would have known about, like malaria or illiteracy, were not things that they thought that the federal government would be very effective in fighting. But it's quite possible that the technologies of today make it easier for the federal government to get involved in these areas. Indeed, I would argue that our very social scientific understanding of how each of us affects one another, and therefore what counts as a public good and a public bad versus a merely private good or private bad, has improved tremendously. So as a result, it was probably inevitable that the federal government would, over time, be granted new powers to deal with these new specific problems.